Good evening, everyone. My name is Kirsty White. I am Program Manager of Exhibitions and Events here at First Sight. I'd like to welcome you all here tonight for our panel discussion and to introduce you to our speakers. So we have Gillian Darley, author of Excellent Essex, Councillor Kevin Bentley, leader of the Essex County Council, Michael Landy, of course, whose exhibition Welcome to Essex is what we're here to celebrate, and our chairperson, Tim Burrows, author and journalist. So it's going to be about a 45 to an hour minute discussion, and there will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end. I should also mention that tonight's discussion is being live streamed. So this panel discussion came about through research for Michael's exhibition. We've been putting this show together for about a year and a half. And through the kind of discussions we were having, it was very interesting to think about why Essex had the reputation that it did and what contributed to that, whether it was the proximity to London or something else. And I know that Tim has put together a very thoughtful and considerate look at some of these reasons, and I will hand over to him now.
I think me and Michael spoke about this exhibition a long time ago. I think it was sort of 2019, wasn't it?
Yeah.
He was just thinking about what to put in it, and I know it's been a real kind of struggle to actually get it out. The goalposts have moved each time, the restrictions have changed, and as we've all been living through this kind of odd time, but it's just so amazing to actually see the show in its entirety. I don't know if everybody here's seen it, but just really, you could spend, I could because I'm an Essex geek, but you could spend hours in there just making notes of just the breadth of Essex material. And I think this is where I found a real kinship when Michael, I'd written for The Guardian for a little while about Essex. It became a muse to me. Editors like to put Essex in their headlines, so I kept getting commissioned. So I basically accidentally started writing about Essex, about the place that I'm from. I'm from Southend-on-Sea, and I just started about 10 years ago to see Essex kind of returning into view, into the mediated sphere, really, through things like The Only Way is Essex, but also through the political changes in the country. There were things being talked about out loud, like leaving the EU, which seemed to be quite popular in the place where I was from, and journalists like to go there and talk to people about that. And these two things kind of intermingled. The Brexit Party launched at the Sugar Hut, the home of Towie, and so all of this kind of stuff started to be out there, and it didn't come from nowhere. I started to kind of digging into it out of interest, but also out of a kind of journalistic interest too. It started to sort of tell a story of the country that had kind of, that we'd suppressed for a while, or that had been hidden. And I think, Michael, I don't know, it seemed that you were finding the same thing, just going through archives, just finding again and again, just Essex in the headlines.
Yeah, I'm slightly older than you, but I guess, well, for me, it was just the amount of material at first was, quite staggering, the amount of material kind of generated, whether it was about class, about gender, it's just the amount of material just generated about Essex. And I think, so when you wrote your piece, The Invention of Essex,
yeah.
And some of the points that you make within that were also the kind of points that I was kind of looking at the same time. So we met in the Guardian offices and had a conversation. I think that was in March. I think it's in March, wasn't it? Just before we got locked down.
Yeah, or maybe like the month before.
Yeah. But then we were going to meet up again, and we were going to go to the Becontree estate and visit the Dagenham Idol, where it's this little idol that's in Valence House in the Becontree estate. But obviously we never got there because everything got shut down. And so we haven't actually, and then you told me you were writing this book, and I said, well, I was creating this exhibition. Yeah. But then when we started having conversations, a lot of our interests were kind of crossing over. And I mean, for me, it's Simon Heffer's piece really is kind of what really grabs my imagination about how the country changes, in a sense, quite radically, quite quickly, as I leave school in '79, right. And things start to change. Thatcher comes to power, things in the country start to change, and no more so than in Essex. Essex somehow becomes this kind of repository for all these things.
Now you're from like the ambiguous bit.
Well, I'm from the bit that we
it's
got.
Not Essex anymore.
No,
it's Ilford in
Essex.
Well, but Ilford does. I mean, you can put it's got Essex on the postal address.
Well, that's Ilford, Essex. Yeah. It's quite confusing. Like we went to school and we still had the three sexes on our school books. Yeah. So, we thought we were in Essex until then I realised that Ilford hasn't been in Essex since 1965.
But that's what's sort of fascinating about Essex is this sort of ambiguity. I suppose if we're talking about 1979 to, Thatcher coming to power to Essex Man, do you remember it being at the centre of things, or is it only in retrospect? Do you remember it? Do you remember Simon Heffer's editorial? Did it sort of...
I think that's the first thing that really struck me, really. I must have done. Somehow I knew Simon had written this piece where he coined the phrase Essex Man back in 1990, and then by coincidence I get the newspaper article, and then about a month later I'm in Australia having breakfast, and I look up and there's Simon Heffer opposite me having breakfast. And I just go over to him and we strike up a conversation, and because I thought this is a sign from the art god that's telling me that I've got to make this, and that's what I did. So I just went with it because I was like really ecstatic. I mean, it was like some kind of, it was like some kind of vision. In a sense, if Simon Heffer could be a vision, then he was a vision. And I thought, this is a sign, and it's telling, so I just went with it. And so, this is obviously, he coins the phrase Essex Man, a young man coming in from Essex into London to make money for himself and his family.
Did you, and you've been called Essex Man by the Telegraph as well, which I've just realised, but we'll come on to that later. So, I don't know. What felt different to you when you started looking into it? Were there things you know Essex Man? Everyone knows Essex Man, but when you're tasked with creating a whole exhibition, where did you start? What did you?
Well, like I said, newspaper articles really. And then because we create a whole, we have like blue tarpaulins with, we create our own font, and we basically, you can't be in Harry Potter because you're from Essex. There are no virgins in Essex. It's the headlines in a sense that kind of swamp you. And then obviously, I have that, and I have, which I never knew about the Plotlanders. So Plotlanders, go out into Kent and Essex, in between the wars, and buy bits of like for £5, they'll buy a plot of land. They call it their English soil. And they'll build a home from not much around them. And so they're like bricoleurs, and artists are also, because we basically make things from what's around us, really. We just, you plonk me somewhere, eventually I'll start making something out of it. And so I pay, because I love the Plotlanders, and because I think just because they get out of smoky old London and get out and try and make a better life for themselves. And so I think that's all part of the same thing, isn't it? Entrepreneurship, being self-made, seeing an opportunity and taking it. And I think that's all part of what Simon's kind of partly trying to narrate as well. And of course, then, one can talk about materialism, about consumerism, about, Essex girl, about loads of money, which is obviously another kind of stereotype that's created in the 1980s, 90s.
It sort of narrates almost the intrinsic wastefulness of the consumerist age, doesn't it? It's like this stuff is being built into the country to not make it the countryside anymore. Essex itself a lot of it's made up of, huge landfill sites on. I mean, a lot of this we're talking about South Essex, so we're kind of
South
we've
Essex.
come up to North Essex to pollute it with our South Essex talk. You know, and I suppose that's what I found so amazing about this show being here, is that when I've written about this thing called Essex, you know, in inverted commas, the Essex stereotype, it's usually London emanating out. I mean, it creates something different. It's a kind of hybrid being, the Essex person or the Essex culture. It's sort of like rural East Anglia being smashed into by I don't know, the population, the swell of London, I suppose. North Essex always tries, you know, it feels different. It's not always as different as maybe North Essex thinks it is, but there is like there are at least 2 Essexes, or maybe there are 3. There's Mid Essex too. But I don't know. I mean, I found looking back to your work, it's about that. It's about the materiality.
Yeah, because Essex becomes, like James Wentworth, becomes rubbish dump of London in a sense because of the estuary. Suddenly, you know, there's historical landfill sites along, you know, from Victorian era where things have literally been dumped on the side, and now it's breaking up and coming back into the estuary. So, so it's always been a repository in that right way as well. And my friend Clive always referred to. He, from Brentwood, he always says that Essex, especially south bits of Essex and along the district, is quite flat apart from the hillocks, and hillocks is normal because it's landfill.
Yeah, there's some amazing hills in Pitsea and Mucking and Tilbury, which aren't, and actually Beckton as well, isn't there? There's the Beckton Alp, but none of these are actually hills. They're in a floodplain. They shouldn't be hills at all, and they're quite eerie. I mean, they're kind of beautiful in a very, I don't know, anthropocenic, sublime way, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, things like you say, we consume things. I mean, I've had a long interest in things we consume, and then what happens to them later on in their lives, because that isn't, you know, that's not the end of their lives. You know, how things are created and how things are used, and then what we do with them at the end of their lives as well. And that's what we used to do to things. We used to literally bury them underground. I don't think we do that so much anymore, or we ship them off somewhere else and let someone else break them down. But obviously things aren't, on the whole, designed to be recycled. Partly because the materials themselves are too cheap. There's no value in it, in a sense, to do that. So there's always, you know, there's all sorts of issues like radio rentals. Like, do you remember radio rentals?
I do, very well.
So you know, you buy the service, you don't buy the hardware, and you know, it's so that's. So I think, you know, all those things, and Simon talks about Essex Man creating these piles. Of course, what I think about, it's not piles of money, but piles of rubbish, because that's just my bent. And
so we have this sort of creation of the stereotype, and I really, if anyone hasn't been in Essexism, go and spend some time there, and you really will see the power of the stereotype and the relentlessness of it. I mean, there's some amazing, quite awful and quite, you know, shocking front pages of the Sun. There are no virgins in Essex was the Sun's front page for the 1st of January 1992, to which it ran a second story the next day of disgruntled readers saying actually there are virgins in Essex, and seemed to be this kind of self-perpetuating media kind of Fleet Street story. There's the Essex Girls Joke book, which I think we both think was actually, it's written under a pseudonym, two authors, Brent Wood and Ray Lee, but it was actually Richard Littlejohn, I think. He wrote the book, and then the Sun reported on that, a whole page. It seems to be this kind of self-perpetuating, joke, but it has a very real heart. It is this change. It's the way Britain changed, partly to do with the deregulation of the financial centre in the City of London, and you know, there was a very real fear. If you look at, there are articles that you can read. There's one in Harper's and Queen in the late 80s or early 90s, and there is a fear of Essex Man. There's a fear of this sort of new money replacing the old money of the landed gentry. So it's sort of a story of England itself. I wanted to come to Kevin because I know this creation of the stereotype must have created a bit of a problem for Essex County Council. I mean, is there, and I know about 20 years ago there was a campaign launched to sort of promote the real Essex. And I think it's always been this phrase, the real Essex, hasn't it? So there's this pushback against this assumption. How real was that? How real was the problem? Was it an issue to do with tourism? Were people not coming? Or?
Well, interesting enough, when it happened, of course, I'm a journalist like you, so I was a journalist at the time, reporting on what Essex County Council was doing. And being a journalist and a PR person, I believe all publicity is good publicity. It's how you use it. And to that end, Brentwood, you mentioned Brentwood. Now, Brentwood is a very nice market town, largely commuter, suddenly has an amazing tourist trade. Who'd have thought Brentwood would have an amazing tourist trade? But it does. People flock there. And I think that's important. So that's good. That's, it's changed the economy there. That's created jobs. That's very good. But it's all about snapshots in time. So you think where the history started, that we start recording, it's the Romans, of course, who landed at Deal, marched straight through Kent, turned right and came to Essex and made this their capital. So they knew something about Essex as well. And it has a brand. Essex is a strong brand. Think of another county and you vaguely know where it is, that county, and you think you want to know something. Mention Essex, everyone immediately has a vision of it. Now, the question is, what is the vision and how can you change it? So there's no question we have had that sort of stereotypical image, and I think Michael's captured that superbly here. And it's a snapshot in time. You can see that of that period that you've just been talking about. But now Essex is changing quite dramatically. We have more wind farms than most coastlines in Europe. We are building a much more sustainable future. Absolutely landfill, we want to move away from landfill. We all have a part to play in that. So we're all consumers. How we consume is very important. And we have a role as a local authority, as does Colchester and all the other local authorities, to help and educate and persuade people to change their habits. So we want to make sure the environment is improved. We have climate change, which is real, and Essex is leading in that world, along with all our district colleagues, along with other organisations as well. So when history writes about this period of time, it will be different from the period of time we're looking at here. Wouldn't it be great in another 40 or 50 years' time if in this great gallery someone did a follow-up to Michael's exhibition of what life has been like over the last 20 or 30 years, and you will see that change. Is it a challenge? Yes, but it's a challenge that we would embrace and change the perception. We have some of the most beautiful countryside in this county. It's not all in the north of the county. If you go down as far as the M25 in the Essex border, you'll find tractors and combine harvesters bringing in the harvest and raising animals and being part of the agricultural side of Essex as well. We're about 80% agricultural in this county, and we need to promote that as a real economy. Rural economy is hugely important. Yet we also have some of the best technology in the country as well, and developed here. Fibre optics were developed in Harlow. The world communicates because of Harlow and the great work being done by two great eminent people there. And our medical universities, which are doing tremendous work as well. So little dinner party gossip facts you can have. We have one of the largest coastlines in the country. Upsets our Cornish colleagues, but we have all these little islands. I live on one of them, Mersey, which add all the coastline up together, which is great. 2 airports, 4 seaports. Some of the greatest connectivity we have, and more to come as well. There is more investment coming into Essex in terms of roads and sustainable roads as well than we've had in decades, which is good. So this is a county that is continually evolving. And what we're seeing here in this great exhibition, and the great book that Julian wrote as well, by the way, which I've read, so I'm surrounded by huge talent here, by the way. I don't have any, but that's why I'm a politician, but these are very talented people. This is a great exhibition because it's marking a moment in history. What we now need to do is take that and start developing our new history. So another artist will come along, maybe you in 50 years' time, because medical advances are so good, it could be you.
Thank you. It's reassuring.
No, it could be you. It could be you. Let's keep that positive.
Could have that in
thought.
writing.
Absolutely, guaranteed. You heard it here first. But the most important thing is it will take it on to another level of story. What is great, though, is we're talking about Essex, and there's no better publicity.
What is a sustainable road? I mean, I should have asked afterwards.
Yeah, no. Well, sustainable road it's not just for cars, which will become electric cars, or lorries, which will become electric lorries, but making sure there's proper public service provision, making sure we have rapid transport systems, the first of which you will see in this town, in the county. Think about if you could go from your house You could go to an airport, which will become sustainable in the future, not quite there yet, or you can go to another big town or city and you never need to get in your car because you have good, reliable, cheaper public transport. We're working on that now to make that happen. These are things that are going to happen in Essex first. We are the county of innovation, the county of entrepreneurship, and a county we want to attract larger businesses here to provide good jobs. And we're supported in that by having 2 great universities, award-winning universities, in this particular town, University of Essex, doing the most incredible work in research and development. The same in the care sector as well down in ARU. Tremendous stuff that we have in this county, and also supported by further education and some of the greatest schools in the country as well. So because of that, we are now developing young people into careers and jobs that 10 years ago we didn't even know existed. And that will keep going on because this is the county that can do that. But your sustainable road will be built for better public transport, better use of the roads, and not just getting in fuel guzzling cars and lorries.
And I just wanted to go over to Gillian to sort of ask why was there a need to say Essex was excellent? What did you feel? Was there a similar impulse that this place is misunderstood, perhaps, or there's the classic phrase "much maligned," which I found out the first time Essex was described as much maligned was, I think, in the 1860s. So it's sort of been a long time coming, this kind of reappraisal of Essex. But what led you to tackling it in that way? Because there's such gusto in that book to kind of show Essex in this.
Well, the first
new
thing
light.
I wrote about Essex, which was actually a review of the Buildings of England volume on Essex, I realised that it was, when you looked at Essex, it was all about the spokes of a wheel, and that, in fact, you read it as per A13, A12, and so on round until you suddenly get to Hertfordshire when it's not relevant. And it has this kind of umbilical arrangement with London, which it's in a way is making and it's undoing both, as from everything you've been saying. But I just think it's a two. The roads are two-way. Everything we've been talking about are two ways. I like the fact in the matter of moving stuff around, be it Westminster rubbish to mucking, and then covering it up, making it into a lovely wildlife centre. In fact, the large amount of Wallasey Island is actually Crossrail, and Crossrail, gave us sort of an extended bird reserve, etc., open ground on Wallasey. I mean, and well done them, because they got ahead of it, didn't they? I mean, we're waiting on the other bit.
I heard a lot of the prom in Southend. I've only read this in one place. I think that was some of the Northern Line, sort of detritus dug up from the Northern Line and put on the bank there. So,
well, anyway, so there's lots of giving and taking, and the same is true of people. And there is a very, obviously, most people who came into Essex, whether it's, and of course we have to sort of distinguish between historic Essex, which is still, and I'm still waiting for somebody to add to my list. There are 3, what do you want to call them, institutions, agglomerations, which are retain historic Essex, and they are the Church of England, the Roman Catholic Church, and Essex County Cricket Club.
That's right.
Please supply further examples. But I was leading a walk this very Saturday on Dengie, and we were doing a walk from Tillingham to St. Peter's, to the tiny chapel of St. Peter's. And it was only about 2 days before that I led the walk that I realised it should have been called St. Paul's to St. Peter's, because the Dean and Chapter of St. Paul's own 3 farms and most of the buildings in Tillingham. Now get that. And that's because St. Mellitus, who sounds like a coffee grinder to me, but anyway, St. Mellitus, who arrived in around 608, so 50 years before St. Ced, that was where the bishop, and he was Bishop of London, and that's where he sort of pitched his tent, so to speak. So, you know, it's all going where I mean, like anywhere else in the country, things are coming, things are going, and many of the people who moved into the new towns, and Basildon in particular, were not Londoners, were not, you know, Cockneys. They were impoverished Essex people, a rural population which had been decimated with agricultural depression, you know, from 1870 on, was, you know, flailing around. You know, the air bases had done their bit, but you know, there was a terrific need for a focus, and that was the focus. And you know, I was walking across the field just the other day, and I saw a sort of, looks like a sort of something from, I don't know, Soviet something with a balloon on a post, and it turns out to be the Fordson Works, aka New Holland, which make all those, we're just talking about combine harvesters roaring across the thing. It's owned by Fiat. So, you know, what do we know? I'm confused.
Oh, it is a confusing
It's
place,
special.
isn't it? Didn't Nicholas Pevsner, I mean, in your review, when you first started writing about Essex as a subject, I think the book you were reviewing is actually up here somewhere, isn't it? I think it's behind you.
Yep.
Just there. Gillian's right.
But he sounded like he couldn't get to grips with it that well.
Well,
I mean, it said it was too big and it's too varied.
it was 1952. It didn't come out till 1954. He did it in January and February with a caravan club membership, which they'd obtained from the editor of the Architectural Review. I mean, it was loaned to them, as was the caravan. His wife drove the caravan down the lanes, and when they could, they stopped at a building. When they could get into a building, he could describe it. I'm not surprised he had a bad time.
See, but I would
That-
say, you talk about confused. Is it confused or showing the diversity of this county that no other county has? That's why the brand is so good. It's not one thing. It's many different things, and it's what you want it to be as well.
Essex is what you make of it.
Absolutely.
I mean, it has been for years. So my history of coming into Essex on my father's side is his great-grandfather built one of those over there. Is that a plotland?
Yeah, that's
Bungalow?
it's a
It's a
museum.
museum, isn't it?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I mean, one of these kind of rectangular buildings that everybody seemed to build, and he built it in the woods or on the edge of woodland in Thundersley. And I went on a walk recently to see if there are any still there, because I know he helped build about 4. Thundersley now is in Castle Point, which is a very densely populated part of South Essex near Southend. And there are actually 2 of them left, but they're surrounded by very, very tall new build houses, which are part of a new development, part of New Essex, I suppose, newer kind of marketed to, I suppose, more affluent people than these small bungalows were built for. I suppose I might question, whether Essex, I mean, I suppose we'll ask Gillian this again, actually, because Gillian's written extensively about plotlands and, I mean, buildings in general. Can someone find if someone's asking the same question as people were at the turn of the century or up to the war, can I find a place for my family in Essex? I mean, it's a bit more problematic these days, isn't it?
What now?
Yeah.
Damn near impossible if you're, certainly the part of Essex that I know best, which is neatly enough, it is neither South Essex nor North Essex, it is Mid Essex. And there is, it's a desperate business to find somewhere to live. Even if you're in work, 2 people in work, there's nothing. And I mean, that search is not being met with any, as far as I can see, there's no strong policy to say, as there was at various points in the interwar period. Local authority housing, 6 there, 8 there, 10 there, according to the villages, nothing. So, I mean, somebody says, where shall I live? They leave. That's it.
Kevin, is there anything Essex County Council can do about that, or is it just council? You know, is it council by council? Is it Castle Point? Is it South End?
Well, it is all of those. Don't get me started on planning and where that's a good idea. And I've got councillor colleagues in the room who probably will agree with me. My honest view, the way we do planning in this country is just wrong. We need to have much more spatial planning, which is what you're talking about. So just giving, and it's not this government or any government, it's just gone on for this for a long time. My personal view is rather than giving district councils a housing target to hit, means you just build houses. What you don't build is communities. And therefore, I think having a much more spatial look at it, so the infrastructure is there as well, that sustains a community. You build it, that's exactly what happened in the Middle Ages. You made sure that communities came together and you built the infrastructure around that to make that happen. And I think we need to go back to that as well. We do need more housing, it's absolutely important. It is not right that young people cannot afford to get on the housing ladder because there's a shortage of supply. And we can have lots of discussions about where that should be and how it should be done. That's a fundamental rule. We need to have that done, not just in Essex, but right across the country as well. And therefore, we do play a part in that. We work with our district, borough and city colleagues in Essex, who are the planning authorities. I see it as working together to make this happen, that we need to put the infrastructure in to make that happen as well. But we in Essex have our own department called Essex Housing. And Essex Housing started because we discovered that people who have learning difficulties and other disabilities who need adaptations to properties, they weren't being built in that way. So we now do that, because I think that's important, because that helps them. It helps them lead better lives, and it helps the economy as well. So we are definitely doing that, and I think we are trailblazers in that, and I think that's extremely good. I know a lot of our district colleagues do a lot of work around housing to make sure it is affordable, but fundamentally we've got to have a gear shift change in how we do it. Everyone should have the right to live in a decent home, whether it's rented or whether it's bought. They should have the right to do it, and we've got to, the politicians, be very brave and have that brave conversation with everyone about housing and making sure we all understand why it's being done. And then, of course, the debate comes where it should be done. And everyone thinks it's a great idea until it's next to them. So we've got to have an honest conversation about how we do that and how we embrace current communities and adapt those current communities for future need. Colchester started inside a city wall. Colchester now has nearly 200,000 residents in it. And that's only in the space of, what, 2,000 years? In history, that's a blink of an eye. What happens in 2,000 years from now? And we've got to start thinking the next 50, 100 years. That's our legacy, to hand on to the next people to run this borough and this county so they can progress it as well. If we decide to duck the issue, we are leaving a bad legacy for people and leaving people behind. And no one should be left behind.
There's a sign, I think, as you enter Essex, there's a threshold between a lot of the banners that hang from the ceiling. There's these great sort of bins with videos of different bits of Essex politics and culture in. And as you enter the archive room, there's the address of the first, well, actually, I don't know if it was the first council house that was bought after Right to Buy, or whether it was just a sort of media kind of set piece where Margaret Thatcher visited a home in Harold Hill, which is actually where my father-in-law grew up, and was an LCC built suburb on the edge of Romford, basically. And it's quite, I see the story of Essex as a story of housing, really, and it's a story of the narrative behind the way we've lived has changed in the last 100 years or more, really, from slums to plotlands to new towns, to buying those same houses in new towns, to what we have now, which is perhaps a slight more of a kind of planning freefall, as we just had suggested. But what's the importance of like putting it there? Because it's quite a prominent. I mean, it's very prominent in the Essex story.
The Right to Buy.
Yeah,
the
address. I can't remember the address, but
it's
the Harold Hill
I can't
address.
remember offhand, but it's
the Patterson family.
But it's Harold Hill, yeah, Palmer Patterson family. Yeah. But I mean, Margaret Thatcher appears in different guises. I mean, she's in their kitchen having a cup of tea with them. and then there's people outside, you know, that popular refrain back at like Maggie, 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 out, out, out. So there's people kind of protesting outside, and you know, then we, you know, Margaret Thatcher was talked about as the ultimate Essex girl, and then we also have like some TV footage, which is in one of the wheelie bins, of someone goes to Romford, and they go to Hollywood's in Romford, which is a nightclub, and they talk to kind of quintessential Essex men back when the Tory party get rid of Margaret Thatcher. It's that night when they stab her in the back, and just Essex man, how they really relate to Margaret Thatcher. They don't actually necessarily relate to the Tory party, but like with Simon, his piece is actually more about this particular kind of person relating much more to Margaret Thatcher than they necessarily did to the Tory party, and I think that's interesting.
And I think they mentioned Norman Tebbit as well, and it's this side of the party which kind of speaks to them more directly, or there's a lot of similarities, I suppose, to Margaret Thatcher's upbringing to some of the people who live in new towns or live in the regions around London into Essex. The shopkeeper's daughter, and she actually lived in Colchester, didn't she? I think. I mean, Gillian, do you know much of the Thatcher in Colchester?
Well, I know
story?
she came from Grantham, but
I think she moved here.
Yes.
She worked in Manningtree.
Yes, ICI in Branton.
Yeah,
yes, so
yes.
she's very close to here.
yeah.
And I think I read that she was radicalised by Enoch Powell in Colchester. So it's kind of I was kind of amazed that she lived in Essex, because it's been a perennial thing. Where the video clip of these guys just kind of proper boogieing in their pinstripe suits after being in the city all day, and then the news camera is on them, and then they're just waxing lyrical about Thatcher on the day she's been usurped by her own party, like she's a kind of star, like rock star or something, like something quite subcultural about the whole thing, maybe.
They somehow they relate much more to her than they do necessarily. I guess they perceive that some of them kind of a bit wet, I guess, and they don't really relate. They don't, for whatever reason, they don't really relate to them. Like Essex man, the way Simon kind of creates his character is that he does own his own home. When you first walk into the exhibition, it says Essex man sees off socialism.
Yeah.
And so that kind of pinpoints certain people's aspirations really, and their and material aspirations about what people want, and they saw very much the Labour Party as at that particular point in time as taxing them and stopping them from being who they wanted to be.
I mean, I suppose, since there isn't an allegiance to conservatism, but Essex always does sort of return those kind, that vote. And I suppose, Kevin, as a Conservative, do you always rely on Essex, or is there? I mean, there's a shift towards UKIP, and there's.
Well, I always rely on Stanway and Pyfleet and Marks 10 Lay Awards, personally, the good people there that keep returning me.
Can the Conservatives always rely on Essex? Is there? Because
no political party should rely on anyone. Okay, you've got to make sure, and I don't want to get into politics here per se, but no political party should just rely on that's your core vote and that's fine, that's okay. All political parties must adapt to the needs of the people of the time and offer those policies up. They will come from different perspectives. I said I've got colleagues here from the borough and also the county council, and we will have differing views about how we get there. But fundamentally, we're standing for election because we believe we can change things for people and help people. We just have different ideas of getting there. That's all. And that's what a good, honest debate is always about. And I don't do that hard line. That's it. I'm entrenched in that view, and therefore I won't move, because that doesn't help people. And you've got to keep continually adapting and improving all the time on those thoughts. I agree with the fact that I think Margaret Thatcher was seen as an icon by some people. I think that's absolutely right. I was just sitting here thinking, why would that be? Well, of course, it was a different time, as we've been saying. She was the first female Prime Minister of this country. There have been some more, and let's hope there are many more in the future as well, in the near future as well. And I also think in modern times, it's not absolutely true of all, but in modern times, She was the first Prime Minister that came from a working class background. Her father was a storekeeper. And that hadn't happened in a long time. So I think that probably spoke to people as well. And suddenly people probably felt at the time, and I'm just thinking back because I was 15 years old in 79, so I'm just a bit younger than you. But I remember it distinctly happening. And I remember that sort of gear shift that people suddenly, I think, probably felt a bit more empowered than they had been before. Now, whether that's right or wrong, we could have that long debate, but I certainly think that probably happened. And that's probably why you get this idolisation a little bit more. It hasn't happened to, I'm just trying to think, hard successive prime ministers. Probably the closest we got to was Tony Blair, when that change happened in '97. It felt like another re-empowerment again. And it will happen again in the future, I'm sure, as well. But no political party should take anyone for granted.
Well, why is, is Essex a bellwether, or is it just Basildon? I mean, why do you think Essex has, if you're talking about Thatcher, but then you can move on to Brexit. Certainly anyone covering the region from Thurrock up to kind of Clacton in the early 2010s could have predicted, or some people could have predicted Brexit a lot sooner than people covering the London boroughs. So
yeah, well,
I mean, why is it again because of this kind of mix of, you do have a mix of a demographic?
Yeah, you do a very big mix of it. All life meets in Essex, no question about that, and that's very important. We want to encourage and promote that, and not just from the UK, now from other countries coming here as well, which I think is great for part of the diversity that we have in this country. We've always been a radical bunch, of course, because the Peasants' Revolt started here in Essex, or rather further south, but people came from Essex, and Colchester as well as part of that. So it's been quite radical in our thinking, and not being, I think people in Essex don't just accept, they challenge. I think that's really important to challenge. Never just accept what you're being told. That's a journalist in me, you'll know that. Never accept what you're being told, challenge it all the time. I think people in Essex are very good at that. I think you saw that in the period of this exhibition. You're seeing it now. People are challenging all the time. And that really puts a lot of grit into Essex, which I think is hugely important. People that always want to question, always want to find out more, always want to do better than their parents have done before, and parents who want their children to do better as well. I've always said, if you want to succeed, this absolutely is the county to succeed in. And whatever you want to do, the opportunity is in Essex.
Why is it in Essex and not somewhere else?
Because I think of the diversity we have. I mentioned before that there's no one thing that says Essex. The north of the county is different to the west of the county, to the mid of the county, to the south of the county. I think that's great. I think that's really good. If you want to be in engineering, pharmaceuticals, fibre optics, all these things, whatever you want to do, if you want to be a carer, whatever you want to do in life, you'll have the opportunity. If you want to be an artist, you have the opportunity. Look at this gallery. How many places in the country outside of London have this? So you can be an artist and you can be exhibited here as well. I think that's fantastic, and that's the opportunity, and we need more of it.
And Gillian, I'm conscious that I keep coming back to the Essex stereotype, which brings us into conversations of politics and the media and the way those two things work together. But what are we missing when we concentrate on that? About Essex?
I mean, there's lots of strands that shake up the mix, and I mean, non-conformity is a general phrase, but it's also non-conformist religion. I mean, I like the fact that driving through Tillingham, which I, as of Saturday knew was largely in the grip of the Dean and Chapter of St Paul's, you go past a rather run-down chapel of the Peculiar People, who were sort of as close to the Plymouth Brethren as you can get. I think I saw, a couple of times, I think at least 2 other chapels. So you've got this mix of people, and certainly in Mid-Essex the same. Lots of different versions of kind of allegiance, and sort of amiable allegiances, differences, people who, again, Mid-Essex, I was sort of wondering what it was that bound together one lot of people we know a bit to another, and I suddenly thought, I think the difference is probably church versus chapel. Well, I mean, this is not really about practicing. This is about where you see yourself, in the cut and thrust. And this is it's a very agricultural area still. And all the vicissitudes of agriculture right up to now are enormous. And you've got, we happen to spent a lot of time very close to a huge farm, which I think is then at least there's double the acreage somewhere else. So it's 6,000 to 12,000 acres, which used to belong to the Co-op pension fund. And for interest, and then it was sold about 2013, I think. And obviously there are lots of different farms and tenants and no doubt paid. You know, there are a lot of people involved in this who have no ownership stake. So this is, you know, to start with, it seemed a nice flag to fly, Co-op pension fund. So they, in their infinite wisdom, sell it. Somebody buys it, moves it on 3 years later for almost double the price. And I actually recently looked up the current ownership, and it's sort of around, it's an Indian agglomerate. And every so often helicopters go over, and I suppose that's how they look at it from head office, because it would be much too tricky to come down and go around the lanes and actually see, you know, what's in the hedges and what's in the fields and so on. So I mean, this is in my head, but you know, why else would we have all these helicopters, apart from perhaps Class A drugs from time to time? But generally speaking, I think it's something to do with landholding. I mean, it's, yeah, I don't know how you pin any of it down.
Has it just been bought for the land, you know, to appreciate value, basically?
And then I was just saying to Tim before, I stopped for a moment on my wanderings around town this afternoon at Beresford's window. And Beresford say, have you got land for us? Mm-hmm. And there's a whole list of all the different versions of events, from your very large garden that might possibly even now have, you know, be available for, you know, an easy planning permission, right the way through completely speculative ideas about what your land could be worth if you were really fast-footed and had the right advice.
I think if Ken Walpole were here, he would sort of bring this back to Henry George and say that this whole movement into Essex was started with the land question in the 19th century, and this idea of, you know, I don't know, it's almost like a socialistic kind of desire that wasn't so political that people would say it so, but it was wanting a piece of.
Well, Letchworth is based upon the principle that the rise in the value of the land, I mean, it's not as simple as it was planned to be, goes back into the community, and it still does. There is a trust that benefits from the upswing of Letchworth, and that goes back to the civic side of life.
And do you think maybe part of the Essex characteristic is that never stuck anywhere? You know, you've got all of these utopian schemes from Barter in Tilbury and the company town to some of the land colonies that Ken Walpole does write a lot about in Purley and places like that.
The strands are different. I mean, if the strands are really self-motivated community groups, such as the Freighting Farm, which Ken has written about, such as the first stab at the Tolstoy and anarchists scratching away outside Purley, you know, with the odd princess turning up a row of potatoes, Russian, I should say, princess. Absolutely extraordinary. And they asked the village over to see what was going on. It's one of my, you know, if ever there was a play to write, it's the village, you know, 1898, the village come over to see what the princesses are doing in the garden at Purley, where they, you know, scarcely have a roof. So you have these different sort of versions of events, and then of course, yes, the industrial ones, but they're somebody else's version of a better life, which is also to do with the manufacture of, you know, boots for who knows what, military, whatever, or metal windows for which we're, you know, forever grateful.
Which is actually there is still an imprint in Silver End, isn't there? I mean, you can see it. I mean, that's actually, I mean, although it's not existing in the same way, you can go and see what was achieved there. I mean, is that to you? Is that what you found when you were digging into this, Michael? That it's that fleeting.
Yeah, well, they weren't necessarily my concerns, but I guess it was my take on Essex from what I remember from the 1970s and 80s, even though Ilford's not in Essex. So it's just, I mean, the exhibition is my take on it, really. It's what it's that's really how I formed it, really. And by reading Gillian's book and me and Gillian go on a walk together, and that's what's on the back wall behind me, in a sense. I kind of.
Could you both tell us about this walk? 'Cause I remember Gillian and I, before lockdown in 2020, we were both at a talk in Southend, which was put together by the artist Eloise Hauser, who did an amazing amount of work looking at Essex's coastal sites and waste management, basically. And she got a professor called Dr. Kate Spencer to give a talk, and she told us how basically most of the marshland around Leigh-on-Sea, how toxic it was, how she wouldn't swim in certain parts, how she certainly wouldn't eat samphire out of Two Tree Island like a lot of foragers had been doing, because she'd measured the toxicity of it. But then she sort of mentioned this path that we can see elements of your walk up here, and you walked along the seawall from Benfleet to Lee. Was that when you found out that it was all made of rubbish, that wall? Because that's when I did. I think we looked at each other like, you know, I just walked it for my birthday, thinking it was a really nice kind of like grassy wall, and basically it was just, you know, it was just years of rubbish up to the 1980s, wasn't it? That was kept over, I think.
I'd walked it several times, thinking just with people who knew about birds and going at particular times, and you know, it's a sort of doable walk, and you can either sort of cop out and take the train back, or you can do a longer walk. And certainly when Michael and I were walking, that was the first time that I had the picture that, you know, we'd heard in Southend, of sort of ghastly seepage of, I mean, should the cap, the clay cap on the wall, you know, give, then untold toxicity would, you know, just well up. And it certainly did. I mean, I tried not to talk about it because we were having a nice walk, and it was a rather grey day anyway. I didn't want to kind of, we were cold.
Quite happy to talk about landfill.
Well, we talked about it in general, but I didn't say, you know, mind your foot.
No.
I mean, I remember at that event, I think it was it somebody was talking about, I think it's Tilbury, which is even earlier.
Yeah.
Because I think they came back for the Benfleet one and recapped it, so it's sort of, you know, it's pretty 99% okay. But Tilbury, they haven't really done that, and there's sort of bits of sort of fabric that sort of come out of the earth, like sort of corpses as you walk. I haven't actually done this jumping walk. It was on offer, and I couldn't go that day. I don't think I've got to cope with it, really. I mean,
I later went on a walk with Kate Spencer over that beach, and it's just all sorts coming out of the bank, really, behind the beach. I think there's a lot of old material from the rag trade, and there's a lot of asbestos on the beach itself. The waves are lapping up. She's actually got a researcher now who's going to measure toxicity of the water. I mean, I think because it's tidal, they're not sure if it's that much of a problem or not. So she's checking that out. But I mean, and it's I think to go on about this stuff, there's always a pushback. You know, you're concentrating on the negative, and but I think because Essex is so coastal, it's like you can see it on. You know, there's a much older dumping site on the edge of Foulness, I think, and it's just, you know, because Essex was considered a wasteland, it's a marshland. Nobody would live in these low-lying parts because you might catch the Essex ague, which was basically malaria. There was no real combating that unless you'd had generational exposure and you somehow got the antibodies. If you just come, I sort of read an academic paper that said servants of richer people who lived on the edge of marshland would actually get paid more because it was a riskier thing to come out to these places, and because they were known as wasteland, they were dumped on, and so, you know, it is that. It's the history. It's very, and it's kind of character building for the place, I suppose, as well. I mean, like that.
Reading about the 1956 writing about, from what I've read, the public inquiry into Bradwell A. And, you know, I think we shouldn't be complacent about things on the edge of Essex, because the state of ignorance when that took place, and that was not a planning inquiry, it was just about electricity supply. 5 days it took, just 5 days. Absolutely mind-blowing exercise, you know, and here it comes again, or doesn't. Bradwell B coming up fast on that same piece of land. So, you know, sort of a lot of, we owe Essex to be alert.
Yeah.
We should be alert on the, you know, we should all be alert all the time. Boom. Sorry.
Don't know how long have we got? Go to questions. Yeah. I mean, it's I don't know if so we have a show of hand. Who would like to ask the panel a question? You said.
It's Kevin.
You were talking about it's a terrific variety in Essex. I mean, you're talking about the agricultural land. Saying drive down the A12 from Colchester to Chelmsford, turn on south down towards south, and you can turn into RHS Hyde Hall. It could be really in the countryside. You see a huge area that I'm going to start growing vines down this vineyard down here. You know, this is a terrific variety actually of agricultural land. Swinging right down here into South Essex. When you're at Hyde, you wouldn't believe in this image of grotting on Essex. I think it's a bit unfortunate. There is this negative view of it. To the extent I have to say, you know, the artists are saying this is a snapshot in time. We've got to start thinking, let's move on from this. Is great. This is a snapshot. Let's move on from
Well,
this.
yeah, I think.
I'm a bit worried.
Well, no, I think there's.
Too much.
Yeah, but I think Benjamin said there's a big disparity in any county in the country between ugliness and beauty. That would be in Essex, I think. So, I mean, I don't ugliness. That's, I mean, and negative. I mean, they're interesting ideas anyway. I mean, that's partly what I'm interested in. What as a society we think of as value and other things we discard. And I think you know, I like the way you know the urban and the rural somehow congregate when it kind of when it comes together, and as you know, there's a kind of beauty there as well.
Yeah, I just agree with that. What's going on? No, I think you're right. I'm not just saying, you know, duty is just one role in the countryside. I went down to Aberdeen, very mixed urban areas. I mean, I like Harlow, actually, it's interesting stuff there. We go to Braintree, people think that's a bit of a dump, but you go to nearby the town that's built by Crittles or Beaton factory down towards Tilbury. So there's a terrific mix of urban and rural.
I actually think this is kind of like hitting the nail on the head in a way, because it is, I think Essex, like the word, is sort of seen as the development into the countryside. And I think people like J.A. Baker, who wrote The Peregrine, wrote a diary about his fears about the Essex countryside. And it was at a time when Foulness Island, which is another rural place which has a strange reputation because it's actually guarded MOD land, so nobody can visit it. It's got some of the best soil. It's won awards for its soil. It's a place that's hard to farm on because you have to share it with the MOD, which are managed by Kinetic, which is the management arm. But it's a really arable place. That was going to turn into a bigger airport than Heathrow. There was going to be a motorway that cut through Southend Pier. Southend Pier was going to be destroyed. There was going to be a road down the Thames. It was the future. And he was sort of looking on in horror. And it was only by political happenstance that the government changed. It was seen as being too expensive. And I think, I mean, this is completely it. I suppose, yeah, and this is what's completely bewitching about Essex, is that you can go to somewhere like Tilbury in Thurrock, which is thought of as, you know, one of the most heavily industrialised places in the country, and it is. But if you sort of like drive out sort of 5-10 minutes. You're just on a country lane. I mean, the vista is in front of you, and it is as it probably would have been in the 1950s. But then you turn another corner, and you're at the new London Gateway Port, which is like a massive sort of like monument to containerisation and very modern living, the way we all live. So I think perhaps that is like, it's taking both of them at once, isn't it? That's like, these things have to coexist, really. There's not one, and we're not fighting for supremacy. It's not like Constable Country versus Basildon or something. It's like these things are there, and how do they coexist, perhaps? Maybe that's the future of it. Who's next? Who would like to, do you need this? Or?
Hi. Hear me?
Yeah.
I guess this is really, I want to touch on ideology really, and Kevin talked about radical Essex, and I think for me, I think Michael Law exhibition was all about, in many ways, celebrating Essex and that ideology. But I spent my political career fighting that ideology, and there's still so much division between the haves and the have-nots in Essex. And I suppose my question is more aimed at Kevin. And I know Kevin didn't grow up in Essex, he grew up in Suffolk, I think.
Norfolk.
Norfolk.
Get it right, absolutely.
But made your way to Essex. So, I'm just curious, what struck you about that kind of ideology that came out of Thatcherism, which, certainly forced me in the other direction, but actually, brought you into politics in a different way to how it did me.
Before you answer, do you mind just repeating the question for the live stream?
Repeating the question, of course, absolutely. It's a bit like the Olympic flame, this, isn't it? That keeps going round people. Anyway, so the question was around about ideology, and Julie asked how I grew up in a place called Galston, which is just in Norfolk. I mean, it's another 100 yards here in Suffolk. And in fact, Galston has moved several times over the history between Suffolk and Norfolk, but currently Norfolk. I then went to London to work for the BBC, and I came back to Essex, and I stayed here chiefly because I met my beautiful bride, who I married, and she was not from Essex, but grew up here most of her life. So that's my motivation in Essex, a beautiful bride. However, to answer the question about the ideology, so what pushed me into one way and you another way? I suppose for me, I came from a reasonably poor background and from a single parent. My father had died when I was quite young. And I think for me, for the first time in that ideology, someone said to me, but you matter. You can be whoever you want to be in the world. You can do that, and I'll be there to help you. Now, you can argue about how that went and how people may have perceived that differently on how policies were laid out. But for the first time in my life, no one said to me, that's where you are and that's where you're staying. They said, you can be what you want to be. And that made me become the reporter and television reporter and producer I became, and now a politician.
Shall we? I don't know if that's. Do we want how that answer was perceived, perhaps, and then we'll move on to another question. Do you want to comment or no?
I just thought it was a very interesting debate, and I guess for me, there was, if you think of like the Fordlawn at Dagenham, there was, back in the day, there was a lot of collectivism where people worked collectively together, and a lot of those workers would have found their way out to Essex. People in the dock, working on the docks would have found their way to Essex. And you think about home ownership, which we've talked a bit about. Thatcher was very much about buying her own council house, and of course that led to a lot of people getting their fingers burned, I think, over that policy. But I think collectivism certainly, for my part, plays a part in ideology.
I mean, I'm sort of in the middle of writing a book about Essex, and very much the narrative of that, or the story of Essex, is a story from collectivism to individuality, to individualism. I think it was in the air before Right to Buy came along. Labour were thinking of a Right to Buy policy, but the difference was investing that money back into the pot of the local administration instead of giving it to the Treasury and taking away. So there is this sort of not thinking about tomorrow inherent in it, and perhaps that is one of the questions as well now. of the future of not just Essex, this country, because I think what we're talking about when we talk about Essex is actually something much wider, and that's what you can see in this exhibition. It's about that shift really in the political framework of the country and the thinking. Does anybody have another question?
Thank you very much. I suppose my question sort of builds on what Julie was just saying. One of the things that struck me about the exhibition, Michael, was that it very much plays into people who've got a stake in Essex. An Essex man was seen as this person that was even if it hadn't come from a wealthy background, was beginning to develop a stake in society and a stake in life in a different way than they might have done before. Perhaps this sort of goes all the way back to Boudiccan revolts and the peasants' revolt and people wanting to have a stake in the place that they live in. And I just wonder where the kids today get their stake from.
Good question.
Here at First Sight, there are hundreds of kids being fed during the school holidays because their families can't afford meals outside of school time when they're entitled to free school meals. Perhaps they're getting a bit of a stake in society from coming to First Sight, but I wonder where the opportunities are for those kids now, because I think the people that perhaps do have a stake in Essex, might have bought their own home or moved out of London and been able to buy somewhere a bit bigger and a bit better. And there's quite often this idea about putting up the drawbridge behind you, and that sort of feeds into what Kevin was saying about build new houses, but where do we build them? Because people often say, well, not next to me, please. So I wondered what the panel's thoughts were around where people get their next thing in society.
Anyone want to answer in particular?
I'll happily take it. Do you want me to?
Yeah.
I think you're absolutely right, Adam. I think that's a cracking question, because where's the next generation come from? What does this exhibition look like in 50 years' time? That's the question I posed earlier.
Kevin, could we just repeat the question for the viewers at home?
Oh, yes, of course. So the question was around, if I just paraphrase slightly, it's around where the next generation of people in Essex, where their stake comes from, how they believe they're part of this county, what does it look like in the future, and what is their benefit going to be out of this? And you mentioned the excellent holiday hunger programmes being run by First Sight. The County Council is doing some as well. So, this is a very important question about the next generation. So therefore, that's why I was saying earlier about what does this exhibition look like in 50 years' time. So you're absolutely right. For me, I'm a great believer, and this is why part of my philosophy as leader of the County Council is around equality. There's lots of equality, whether it's sexual equality, gender equality, whatever the case may be, and that's paramount. That has to happen. But there's also a lot of equality around getting people the ability to reach for the stars. Doesn't matter if they don't touch them, but the ability to reach for the stars, getting to the same level where everyone is equal. And that's what we need to do, and that's what certainly my administration is going to concentrate on wholly in all of the work that we do. So the reason we are now analysing why we're in a situation that some parents cannot afford to feed their children during these holiday periods. So we shouldn't need to have holiday hunger programmes. Thank goodness we do, but we shouldn't need to have them. So now we're looking very carefully at what that's going to be, because what's that going to mean for that young person going forward? What can we do to help in society with their education, with their parents, to lift them out of this area, making sure there's better quality jobs, making sure the ability to have good education. That's not about a comment around schools or teachers, that's a society issue, getting people ready for school, making sure they have the ability to learn, have the appetite to learn as well. That's something we have to do. All this it's hard and it's difficult and it's unseen. But this administration at the County Council is not frightened to tackle that. It will upset some people, but we're going to do it because it is important that no one is left behind. It's important that everyone has those equal chances in life. So when that exhibition comes in 50 years' time, what will their stake be? Their stake will be that I stayed in this county because I received an excellent education in this county. I received the job opportunities of things I wanted to do that gives me a good salary in this county and a good wage to be able to either have affordable rent or affordable house to live in or buy. That's what I want the exhibition to be. And not about I, but about we. And that's hugely important. That's why I think Essex is a great county. In all its diversity it has, and huge diversity, the one thing I can tell you right now especially, with people who are coming here because they're being forced to come here because they have to leave their homes. The generosity of the Essex people is staggering. You haven't all quite seen that yet, but you will very shortly. Is staggering. And that's why I know this county has a great success. We have to do more there, we will do more.
Thanks very much, good evening. Just on that point, really, my name is Nick King, I'm Chief Executive of the local health trust running hospitals in Colchester, Harwich, Clacton, and in Halstead. I kind of hear what you say, Councillor, but in my experience, I think there's a bit of a danger that absolutely defining oneself as Essex, feeling that attack for so many years, is there a sense of defensiveness in Essex? So from my experience, we have had more cases of racial and homophobic abuse to staff than I've ever seen in a 40-year career. And I've spoken previously about, publicly, about the racism that we see every single day in the hospital from patients and from some staff. Is that something that other people feel? Is there a danger that defining Essex so strongly doesn't allow difference?
Well, I'll answer. First of all, I'm very sad to hear that's happened. That's a dreadful thing. I don't know if that's unique to Essex, but it's happening across the country. And if it is, I'm even sadder, because it shouldn't be happening. And certainly on our frontline staff in the NHS, the frontline staff that you see who are caring for people, hugely important. And I pay huge credit to them and all those care workers as well, those who are in care homes who are caring for people, because we are marked out as a society by how we care for people. So I'm sorry to hear that. I don't think that's about an Essex identity. I really don't. And I think you could go to perhaps other parts of the country and hear that very sad story. And if that is happening, then we need collectively to make sure it doesn't. And we do that by the changing face of society in Essex, by the job opportunities I've mentioned, by the career opportunities, by the education opportunities, by the levelling up with people to make sure everyone has that equal chance in life. And no one feels they need to be in that position because they hate a certain kind of person because they think they're doing better or taking their job. I hope that's in the past. If it's not, then we need to work harder. You and I, Nick, need to work harder on that to make sure it doesn't.
I mean, I would just add, I mean, perhaps there is a bridging between, you know, why are we talking about this kind of thing when we're talking about Essex? I mean, in Simon Heffer's piece, he describes Essex Man as breathtakingly right wing. Essex Man moves on, you know, from Thatcherism to perhaps Farageism. I'm not saying, you know, we're talking in like, you know, we're not personifying, we're not talking about specific people here, but we're talking about politics that, you know, it shifts through the years. You know, Essex votes for Blair, but Essex does go back to Farage, and Essex does become personified with perhaps a version of conservatism, which perhaps is a bit more combative around things like national identity and race and things like that. So I think perhaps, you know, any politics moving forward needs to address this in this county, because I mean, you're right, there are pockets of, you know, diversity, and there always will be more diversity coming from London. So it's something that needs to perhaps, I mean, I'm just interested to hear, I mean, have you been working, I don't know just wanted to ask you, is that a long-term experience you've had? Has it got worse? Is there a narrative behind that? And how do you know it's specific to, you know, Essex?
I've been working in Essex for the last 5 years. I've been in the NHS for 42 years. It started when I was 3. So I worked mainly in the southeast, but also right across the country, and I got into a lot of trouble nationally a few years ago by saying it was the most racist I'd ever seen. Patients and visitors, and the abuse to staff is the worst I've seen in my career. And I stand by that. I think it is getting worse. I think COVID has absolutely exaggerated a lot of pain in our society. It's amplified the division, and I think absolutely, I've heard some fantastic things about Essex. I love working in Essex. I spend my time halfway between Essex and Suffolk. They could be on different planets. And I love the county, and I love the energy, and I love the the edginess, but I also find it one of the saddest county I've ever worked in, because of I suppose, the homophobia, the racism, the lack of acceptance of difference, and the extraordinary poverty that I've never witnessed anywhere in this country. And I think whilst we celebrate the county, we should absolutely celebrate the county. We shouldn't romanticise the county. We shouldn't ignore that difference. We shouldn't ignore the incredible poverty, the incredibly hard lives. And absolutely, Kevin, I agree with you. We need to give everybody that opportunity, but not to believe just by creating the environment. We need to go further than that and really understand what it is. What are those blocks that are getting in the way? What is it that we're doing? What are we doing as the public sector? Where are we stopping people accessing good healthcare, good education, stopping people getting those opportunities?
Thank you. Who's anyone else?
Thanks very much. I'm going to steer away from politics completely, because one of the things that we're here to talk about, Essex is the place that's been brilliantly represented in your exhibition. And I think one of the key parts, I'm born and brought up in Essex, so I'm 60 odd now, so I've been here for quite a long time. I've seen an awful lot of changes, and I think that's one of the key things about Essex, is that we're not afraid to change. I was from a farming family, and back in my day, my childhood, Essex was one of the biggest almond soft fruit growers. It's almost all gone, it's all been replaced. But we're also not afraid to take on the changes, and we're also leading in so many areas. We lead in the arts with yourself. We've got Elsa at the back who challenges other issues. We've got absolute cutting edge. We have cutting edge technology. I'm chairman of Visit Essex, and I've seen some of the fantastic places that we've got, and every single day I'm bowled over by some of the places and some of the people that we have. And you pick up some really amazing statistics, things, Essex is a global leader in so many things. Every single radiotherapy machine on the planet has a component made in Chelmsford. Every single satellite orbiting the Earth has a component made in Chelmsford. And we are leaders in biotechnology, and so we're leaders in the arts, we're leaders in the creative and the physical arts. And that is only because we are open as a people and as a place to challenge where we are. We've already heard, we were the first to embrace Thatcherism and certain parts of Thatcherism. And that's down to the adaptability of the Essex man. And we don't accept that stereotype. And Elsa was part of a project that I led a couple of years ago to challenge that stereotype. And we found the most extraordinary people around the county. And so, yeah, of course it's not perfect. Nowhere is perfect. And Michael, you picked up on some of the things and some of the things that Julian has mentioned, and I think you were probably part of the walk that I took part in. And you referred to the beaches in Tilbury. And one of those I found is called the Beach of Lost Dreams in Tilbury, because one of the dumps that you talked about was where they put the rubbish from the Blitz of the houses that were destroyed. And what is being washed up now are bits of glass and crockery from those houses. So the Beach of Lost Dreams represents all those things that the people lost sort of 80 odd years ago. And Essex is a fantastic place. There's no other place I'd like to be, and that's really why this exhibition in this fantastic gallery, which is a national treasure, and as I said, it's something else where we lead in support of the modern arts, and as I said, there's nowhere better that I'd like to live. And I've read Gillian's book and been to this exhibition 2 or 3 times. So, yeah, really, it's a verbose statement, but well done to you, and well done to the people of Essex.
Mm.
We do have one question from someone on the phone. Christine Cowley asks, Christine Cowley asks, how does Essex adapt to the post-COVID world? And what is the change in commuting? How does the change in commuting affect our towns and our town centres? Is there no one in particular?
I'll start off. So how does Essex adapt to the post-COVID world, in particular to the commuter towns and town centres? I know, I know Christine. She's a very learned, engineer and all-round scholarly person around Essex and development and planning. And I know she lives near Basildon, and I know she has been following the story of Basildon recently with interest. There's development going on in Basildon. It's called the Basildon Master Plan. That master plan has been in the pipeline for a year or two. It started off as being, I don't know, sold on the back of quite a few tower blocks, which could have been more than 20 stories high, and they were going to be marketed to commuters. And I think that's in doubt now, because there was a residents' party that set up and took on the Labour administration that was trying to push this through. And now they didn't win any seats, but it just meant it tipped things so that Labour don't run don't run the council, can't push ahead with the master plan. And it was quite ironic because the party were left wing, but they took on Labour to make a left wing stance. But now Basildon is awaiting what's next. And I suppose the thing that everybody was most unsure about the project, apart from that here is a post-war town with, I mean, Gillian could talk about some of the architectural, I don't know, you might call it savagery that's happened in Basildon. You know, Freedom House, which was a quite elegant building, is now no more. But these towers might not be built in the same way. And one of the big ideas that has changed is this idea of commuting. Is Essex a commuter place or not? Is the southeast of England a commuter place or not? Will it be built as a place where people can work from home? What do those homes look like? How reliant on rail travel are we? We are really at a crossroads here. Nobody knows the answer to this, as much as people probably want to say they do. Talking to everybody from campaigners to people on the council with portfolios in housing in Southend up, people don't exactly know what's going to happen. So perhaps it's an opportunity for Essex. I don't know. I don't know if anyone else. I think Gillian might have some words to say on this.
Well, I was just musing on this the other day, and it occurred to me that maybe one of the sort of bugbears, it's not a particularly Essex thing, it's just the way people live now, is the churn. People, they settle somewhere 4 or 5 years, their job changes, their company sends them somewhere else, and they churn on. And that's very much a fact of life for many people. And I was wondering whether perhaps this is going to be a moment where the churn slows. And because people have different options, and which is everything from where they work and how their companies are rethinking things, and where they've perhaps drawn in on the bricks and mortar element of life. I think people may, we can already see people spending more money on the houses they live in, just upping the, usually tarmacking the front garden so that their car can sit there. But anyway, much improvement of places. I wonder whether, in fact, there's going to be a bit more consolidation of where people live, and with that comes consolidation of, awful, cliche word, community, but people get more invested, and things like the cricket club or the village social or the whatever has a more sort of, there's a certain amount of static that is needed. Especially, this is more of an observation about the rural side of things. And, you know, the farmers stay, you know, it's a farmstead, as a very long-term Essex person pointed out to me. You know, most farms are going down generation on generation on generation. We're not talking about the agribusiness farms, we're talking about the family ones. So there's lots of stability already, and now I think there'll be more. I think that's playing into an idea that will be a little bit more like, you know, the village where nobody went anywhere, you know, of, I suppose, you know, the interwar years. So it's just another, I think it could be a sort of, you know, a cause for measured optimism.
I was just going to, I'll come to you, Kevin. I was just going to say, we haven't actually mentioned the word London that much, which is quite rare for a talk on Essex. It's always the elephant in the room. It's a big elephant. But I just wanted to very quickly say, does this, you know, implicitly what you're saying, London's less important, maybe, or is it just that people, you know, will work for firms in London, but they won't go there? I mean, how do we see this relationship now?
I mean, from my observation, there's a lot less sort of middle distance commuting going on than there used to be. I mean, having sort of, you know, kind of an experience of 20, 25 years in one area, you know, I just, you know, it's not just that people are getting older. I just think people, you know, that doesn't seem to be, you know, on cost grounds, on comfort grounds, on familial grounds. It's just not, it's no way to live. And I think, you know, I remember talking to Jason Cowley on the New Statesman, and I was trying to pull a view about Essex out of, you know, somewhere else. And I was saying, I think actually, you know, commuting is on the wane, and that was pre-COVID. And it's a different sort of commuting anyway. And it's, you know, if anything, you know, you look at the bicycle sheds around Chelmsford Station, you know, there's a different pattern in all those things, all of which plays something.
So rest in peace, Essex Man, basically. He's no longer going to be vomiting on the platform of Liverpool Street.
I won't comment on that, but I think Gillian actually has hit a very important nail on the head, and I think that was an excellent answer. There is going to be less people moving around for jobs because they don't need to move around for jobs anymore. They can do it from home. And we've all been in that position, haven't we, in one way or another. Certainly, I don't go to County Hall 5 days a week. I used to. I go maybe 1 or 2 days a week now because I don't need to. The rest of my meetings I could do online and do it very successfully online. So I think this churn is right, and I think the benefit of that will be a sense of community again. When we were in lockdown, look at that sense of natural community that took place across the country that we probably hadn't experienced for many, many years. It's a very sad reason why people had to do it, but they were looking out for their neighbours. They were caring for people without being asked. There's no instruction to do that. They did it. Went shopping for people. The groups from various different backgrounds, various different religions came forward to help people. That hadn't been seen for a very, very long time on that scale. So I think you're right. I think there's going to be less churn and a greater sense of community. Is London less important? I don't think as a global player it's less important. Are as many people in London? I think no, there's not. And I've been to London quite a few times recently for various reasons. Tourists are coming back, that is good news, that's good for the economy. But of course we're not seeing, in the city it's quite empty still. Big, huge modern buildings sitting quite empty. So that will change the trade in those areas as well. And maybe people who had trading shops in London, in the city, may move out to where they live and start trading there. So I think that is going to happen, and that greater sense of anchoring people to where they come from, I think is going to happen, not just here, but around the world as well. And I think you're right, no one's got an answer. Time will play out to see how that happens. But this will be a pivotal moment in how the human race starts to respond to each other.
Michael, I feel like because you're from Essex and London, maybe you should have a comment on that.
No, I mean, it's, as you say, it's too soon to say, I think, at this moment. But because as everyone was talking, people thought the world was going to change after the banking collapse back in 2008, and within no time at all, we're kind of back to where we were. So I'm a bit sceptical actually about the end of, or the end of commuting. I think unless you create another model, another model or another template, then I think it's very hard to replace unless somebody comes along with a new model. Then this is the model we have at the moment.
And there's all those trains and all of those offices, so they're either going to be used or they're not. So I suppose time will tell. Do we have any time for more questions, and do we have any more questions?
We have one more role. Question for Michael. Do you plan to talk show, and do you think we would recognise these issues raised in their own unique locations?
I mean, Essex is big everywhere, isn't it? Everyone knows Essex, man.
Well, like people say Essex isn't just in Essex, but there is no plans to. I mean, it's very specific to this, obviously, to this county. Obviously, I'd like to take it to South Essex, but I don't think there's any. At the moment, there's no opportunity to do that. So it's very particular to this county. So it's not really something that, I mean, language-wise would really make much sense anywhere else but here, I would say. Unless someone can.
You get a flotilla and go around the country. I don't know. As we're all, we're not allowed to travel, so maybe we could bring Essex to the rest of the country somehow.
They did that with the Festival of Britain. They had a boat which went round with some kind of exhibition extolling.
So have we got funding for that?
So I can't
confirm
see why
that
not.
today.
Well, yeah, someone said, I remember one of the filmmakers said why Essex, in a sense, kind of was attracted to, conservative Thatcherite ideology, and why the North, because he was from the North, why the North wasn't back in the 80s, and I guess it's partly to do with, obviously they had car industry, mines, they had a kind of manufacturing base, which obviously over the years they lost, and I think it's probably partly that, and obviously Essex is obviously a more service-based economy as well.
And do we have any more? That's it. All right, thanks everyone for coming.
Yeah, great.
It's been really excellent and very lively. And thanks everyone at home for watching, and thanks to the panel. Thanks to Michael for making such an excellent show, which I urge everyone to go and see again. I'm going to come and see it again and just geek off in front of the various television screens sitting on rubbish skips. And thanks to Kevin for joining us to give the official line, the party line on Essex. Thanks so much to Gillian, and I urge everyone to get Gillian's book.
Yeah,
I think
very
it
good
must
book.
be in the room. Is it? It's just a fantastic meander around the county, and you'll learn so much if you read it.
Is it on sale
And yeah, thanks
It's
for
on
first
sale.
sight.
It's on sale here, Gillian's book.
Yep.
Go get it. Get the
Go-
artist,
go get
the
it.
author to sign it.
I
Yeah,
did.
yeah, hassle Gillian at
Dozens.
the end. Great. That's it.
Thank you. Well done.
Thanks, Tim. Well done.
Thank you.